Welcome to another episode of Commerce Insights podcast by Woolman. Today we are talking about CPG brands, subscription business model, and everything related. And we have a special guest here, Ben Fisher from Rodeo. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Today we will discuss sort of like what is CPG, what you have learned from subscriptions. But before, we should probably tell the story so that we met on the first day of Shop Talk in Las Vegas. So Ben, kindly introduce yourself and a bit about your background and your business.
Sure. Yeah. What a romantic encounter in the random hallways of Shop Talk. And I think even before that, it was a random exchange over LinkedIn. And then literally maybe like 10 minutes later, we ran into each other organically. That was pretty remarkable. Um, so my background's as a designer and programmer. I started off in the olden days. I was a Flash developer and designer, and basically I've always been building digital products. And then after I graduated college, I got into basically launch. I would say as an industry, building digital products and even e-commerce had finally actually become a thing. Shopify, I would say probably like 3 or 4 years into my own entrepreneurial journey was released. And I decided after like a few previous businesses that I wanted to focus on building software tools that specifically helped entrepreneurs in the e-commerce space. I was looking at a way to find like an area to focus, and specifically what was interesting to me was like helping other people find ways to make more money by using tools that I built. And so the first business there was a company called CartHook. And with CartHook, what we did was it actually started off as a product that helped recover abandoned shopping carts. And that's when we stumbled upon the Shopify ecosystem. I think our first integration was with Volusion and then BigCommerce. And Shopify was like sort of an afterthought. It was not the Goliath that it is today. And while in the Shopify space, we recognized this opportunity to do basically post-purchase upsells. It was a concept that existed in digital marketing, specifically on ClickFunnels, but not in e-commerce. There was no way to do a post-purchase offer for brands on Shopify at the time, and so that's what we created and built that business. And I'd say we ended up selling CartHook. I left the day to day about 3 years before we had sold, and at that point, part of what I saw while out at CartHook was this rise in subscription e-commerce, and how sort of powerful. I mean, I know from my own experience building B2B SaaS companies how powerful compounding revenue is and recurring revenue, and it's very, very attractive. And I became really fascinated in the brands that we were working with in CartHook, both the things that were working well in subscriptions and also I'd say a lot of the problems that I observed that brands were dealing with. And so when I left the day-to-day of CartHook, I actually was a fractional CTO for subscription e-commerce brands in New York City that were at around their Series A. And I was really focused on what are the tools and strategies that are and aren't working to help them scale. And then when Shopify released their native APIs to allow basically engineers around the world and entrepreneurs around the world to create we'll call alternative subscription solutions, I jumped in with my partner and focused specifically on sort of applying the strategies and lessons that I took from my time at CartHook, as well as in my consulting with the subscription e-commerce brands, to build the platform that we have today. I don't know. Does that cover it? Is that the general arc that's useful?
That definitely does, and I remember when I was like focusing mainly in Europe, but when I started to consult companies in the US, everybody kept talking about CartHook, so I definitely know what you're talking about, and kind of a nice growth story you've had, and now jumping to a new company, and definitely you've seen a lot, so we want to know more. So how did you sort of like identify the opportunity to create this sort of like subscription platform. As you pointed out, it was something like Shopify did certain changes, but what
Yeah.
was the inspiration behind the venture? Was it so that you had been in the business, or was it something that you found out that there is like room to enter in the business? And are there certain skills you learned at Carthook which are like essential now? So
Yeah. So I guess it's a few things. Um, so one of the lessons that I took from Carthook specifically, but also previous businesses, is that the most the healthiest business that you can create is one where you can directly and measurably improve the revenue of another company. One of the unusual, no, I wouldn't say it's unusual. One of the challenges of our first product at Carthook, the shopping cart abandonment tool, was we helped recover abandoned shopping carts, which, was the pitch was basically it's free money. These are people who had abandoned your checkout page, and we did is we helped you build um, drip campaigns effectively to get them to come back. So right, so this is money you would not have other had. But we would actually have people, because it was, those orders are not necessarily, they're kind of murky, right? If you're looking at Klaviyo or any ESP, you can look at a click and you can be like, well, maybe the person got a phone call, or maybe they just happened to like open up an old email, but they were already intending to go there. And so the attribution piece was actually a bit difficult, where we'd actually have phone calls with merchants saying, like going through, and they're like, no, that customer that you counted as a recovered cart, we actually talked to them on the phone, or they had tweeted at me and I tweeted back at them, and then they went and clicked the email. And so what you had was sort of this product that made brands money, but you were in a bit of a weird place around taking credit. And so what we found, and with Carthook, we were at the checkout page initially. Like we had a Carthook built checkout page, and then we controlled like the entire sales funnel, like the upsells and stuff. And so there was no question that the value that our product was offering was directly related to the purchase, right? It wasn't just conversion; it was the actual point of purchase, and there was a lot of power there. And so subscriptions have a very similar dynamic, where the subscription, a lot of the value that a brand's getting is both the subscription mechanics. There's the different tooling and functionality that enables the recurring revenue piece. And again, as an industry, I'd say that the benefits are in the tool sets are changing, but just in terms of like an orientation, like subscriptions are a very interesting business. And part of that the reason we started this was like subscriptions are a great tool, but one of the mistakes that I've seen firsthand in working with brands is that is in some ways leaning too hard into a subscription program. Subscriptions are great for some customers, but they're not great for all consumers. Now, especially in CPG. Like I have an example from like literally a month ago. I received a shipment of a family size delivery of paper towels. I live alone in New York City. I had bought it through Amazon. It was on Amazon Subscribe and Save. I did not need more paper towels. I still had an entire cupboard of paper towels. I received this box of paper towels, had no idea it was coming, and I am not joking. I now have a freezer full of paper towels because I had no other shelf space and I live in New York City. And the very first thing I did is I went and I canceled my subscription. And that anecdote, funny enough, and it is true, it happened to me last month, is what happens to consumers all around the world. And what it results in is bad subscription experiences. It leads to consumers having sort of an icky one where they become increasingly reluctant to subscribe to other brands in the first place, not because your brand did anything to them, but they have, I don't want to call it PTSD or subscription PTSD, but they had a bad experience subscribing, in part because they lose so much control. And in theory, it's great, but in practice, and with CPG products where it's not a medication that you take the same amount every single day, with CPG, like shelf-stable products, your consumption will vary, but the actual systems that do fulfillment, they'll automatically charge you and they'll mail it to you. And so there's just like there's just naturally going to be a disconnect there. And so almost inevitably, your customers are going to have a bad experience. So when they do, they blame you, they cancel. And like basically, the last stat I saw was around 5% of people come back and buy again after canceling. But again, they're not canceling because they don't like your product. They're canceling because of a bad experience. And so when we were looking at the brands who have done subscriptions extremely well, and like what have I learned and observed in my partner, what we focused on and implemented from day one into Rodeo was this idea of a consumer centric experience where subscriptions and the subscription experience is a key piece of driving recurring revenue, but it can't be used as sort of a sledgehammer. And what really matters is nuance and recognizing there are some customers, let's call it 10% of a brand's customers, subscriptions are a great and convenient way to consume your product. But there's a whole wider range. Just like 85% of your customers or 90%, maybe it's a normal automatically renewing subscriptions, not the best experience. And so what we developed are a range of tools, and the most powerful of them is called we call an on demand, where instead of it automatically charging you and it shipping it to you, it sends you a text message and or an email saying, "Hey, are you getting close to running out? Do you need more?" And the consumer can snooze it or say or reply yes, and it automatically gets fulfilled. And so, what's important there is it's basically giving full control of the consumer, and it's dealing with a lot of the objections that most consumers who don't want a normal subscription. It gets rid of those objections, and it's attractive to a much wider range of a brand's customer base, but it's still driving a repeatable, recurring purchase cadence. Does that make sense?
Totally, and I love that you have sort of this kind of like unique perspective the whole matter, and I definitely can hear your experience that you have done tons of these cases and been in the business for a while, and that you truly like give the consumer the power and the possibility to adapt to their situation. So
Yeah.
that these
And one thing I'll
subscriptions,
add there, sorry,
yeah,
was
please.
because it reminds me what you just said was it ultimately is it's about the consumer. And I joke that I feel like we're a therapist between a brand and a consumer. The brand wants to maximize revenue. They also want to maximize loyalty and like a lot and like provide a great experience. Like that's how you build a great brand. But let's be honest, like you're also trying to maximize revenue. But the way to do that is like what does the consumer care about? The consumer cares about they actually don't care about subscriptions. What they care about is having your product when they need it and not too much of it and not getting charged more than they actually need, right? And that
Yep.
experience of being charged when you don't need it, that sense of feeling of wasting money just destroys goodwill with most consumers. And so the key part of this is really understanding how to segment your customer base to be like these are the folks who are just like a subscription is perfect for them. For some other people, it actually the consumption strategy might be buy in bulk. They want to buy 6 months worth of the product because they don't live in New York City and they have like a garage where they can store it. Like I have friends who are like that too. And then there's people like me who are in the middle who, yeah, just ask me and I will immediately tell you, yes, I need more, or nope, remind me again in a few days. And what's great about that is it removes the onus from me as a consumer to have to think about your brand. Because if you think about all this stuff in a person's life, the last thing that they want to be thinking about and will be thinking about is your specific brand, especially as more and more brands are asking for subscriptions and trying to get you to buy. Um,
Great. Love those examples and the story overall. And then when we are heading more sort of like what's happening in the CPG, so these consumables, whether it's food, whether it's cosmetics, whether it's something else that people consume, how do you see which are the key challenges these brands face now in 2023? And how would you like overcome these hurdles? Because at least I know like tens of brands who are thinking about, first of all, going D2C, or then the second
mhm.
step that should I unlock subscriptions, how to go. So what would it be your advice?
um, yeah, so I mean, like those are very different profiles of call it a stage of a business. Um, right? Like there's brands who have built up a retail business and they're trying to go into D2C, which I think is one of the use cases you talked about. Another one's a D2C brand who's sold transactional and has not done subscriptions, but is considering incorporating subscriptions. And then there's the brands who currently offer subscriptions and how can they differentiate it? Um, I would say of those, just so that I'm clear on exactly what the question is there one of those specific segments that you're most interested in, like sort of my advice?
I think the middle segment is the one that
Got
I'm
it.
looking for. So that's the one.
Okay. Yeah, so they're considering adopting subscriptions, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
they have
Yeah.
already been a business. Probably it's something that the pandemic like
Yep.
pushed that you need to sell directly. You have started with that. You might do like decent enough revenue, but then you are like, what
Yeah.
about this? Should I give this a go? This is at least something that we see a lot in
Yeah.
Europe.
No, that makes complete sense. And I mean, those are brands I really enjoy talking to because in part they've had so much success, especially the brands who've had a lot of success on the transactional side, like driving repeat purchases. What they don't have is a recurring piece. Um, the typical way that I'd suggest thinking about that and is first off segmenting your customers and looking at what is the typical replenishment rate. Because part of what you want to also, well, let me take a step back. Some products are a natural subscription. Some products are not. A natural subscription is something like, let's say, coffee, where you consume it on a fairly regular basis. You're not going to consume it at the exact same rate, but you're going to want to continue to replenish it. There are other products that are just not as well suited for a subscription. I would say like body wash is a good example. How much body wash do you go through? I don't know. Right? What if you're traveling or you bring your body wash? Like, there are certain product categories that, and you will see those as subscriptions, but they're not a natural subscription. And so part of to take a look at is of the products you sell, where do you fall in that spectrum of this is a natural subscription product, or this is one that maybe shouldn't be a subscription, right? And then you have this like in between spectrum of, well, no, like there's some sort of replenishable cadence. Like beauty comes up a lot, and what's interesting I've learned is like men and women's beauty patterns and replenishment patterns vary, and one I'd say one off the cuff remark I heard from a friend of mine in the beauty industry was her hypothesis was that male like skincare products are a much better subscription like geared for subscriptions than women's. Like men tend to be very loyal and they just kind of want it and they want it on repeat and they don't want to think about it, which as a man makes complete sense to me. I tend to buy the exact same. I've been buying the exact same like moisturizer for probably the last 10 years. Whereas with women, they tend to be a bit more exploratory. Now,
Yeah.
both of those could be. You can have subscription programs designed for both of those segments, but they would probably look really different. Like with the women, my inclination would be to incorporate like surprise and delight and discovery and integrating some sort of like, I think the early subscription e-commerce box brand was Birchbox, right? There was another one called BoxyCharm where it was all trials. What they would do is they'd mail you a trial of a bunch of different beauty products, and then the person would go out and they could buy the full size of the product that they like most. And so discovery was a huge part of that business. And so going back to like coming up and designing your subscription experience, it starts with understanding how subscribable is your product, like how predictable is the replenishment period, because that will inform a lot around what goes into your subscription experience. Can you get away with just offering your product on renewal? Or, and I would say in general, you can't really avoid this now, but it's like, how do you layer additional value on top of just we'll call it the autonomous delivery of your product? We're seeing membership more and more coming up with the brands that we work with, where there are perks that you can only get as a subscriber. So it's less about the subscription and more about being a member. And that, for me as an experience and as a designer, resonates much more than just this idea of a subscription, because the subscription is just like, it's a very specific thing, whereas membership encompasses, you're a member of a club, you're a member of oftentimes if it's a lifestyle product, like there's a few brands like Mudwater who've done an exceptional job of their product is not just about, this this drink that you have that is sort of bitter for me. But they've created an entire cult because it's really focused around like this lifestyle around, substituting out caffeine, and we'll call it holistic living. And so what they've done really, really well is create an entire experience and a sense of belonging around these sort of common characteristics of people who buy Mudwater and why they'd be attracted to it in the first place. And I think that's a key part if you're looking to incorporate subscriptions into your business. You don't have to start with it from day one, but that is something, especially as more and more brands are offering subscriptions, finding ways to layer on value that in particular are really attractive to your most ardent consumers. Because I would say the typical way that brands will try to entice you into a subscription is they'll offer a discount. The truth is, discounts are attractive to some consumers, but they're not the right carrot for a lot of people. And so just deeply discounting your product 20, 30% is not necessarily going to get you more subscribers, and it's certainly not necessarily going to build you a healthy subscription business, and you're eating into your margins. What you'll often find is, like, if there are certain levers or things that people care about a lot, you can discount the product a lot less, and then layer in these other things that your customers perceive to be, much more attractive, whether it's exclusive products that can only be bought through the subscription, or free shipping, or there are other ways of doing it, and just so not sort of blindly going in and just recreating exactly what everyone else does around, especially around price, that has such a huge impact on your margins.
Love it, Ben. And especially I find the thing that you just mentioned, like discounts and the importance of that, very interesting, because that's something that if you read about the articles, people very much recommend you to give lots of discounts. So you have a slightly different approach. So love it. And actually, like added on that, my favorite topic, data. So how important is customer data and analytics in the process if you start with a subscription, or if you already are in the subscription business? What should you do with the data?
Right. Well, so it's really interesting. And the way that I had originally thought about our business, and I'll just say I because I'm the one talking, but there are data analytics tools that have raised tens of millions of dollars just to do the analytics. Then you could even get into like BI tools that do like business intelligence. And so from day one, what we focused on at Rodeo was we want to be best at class around the membership and subscription experience, around, again, like flexibility for consumers and focusing on ways to drive up LTV and drive repeat purchases. Analytics was something where we're like, there are other brands doing analytics really well. Let's not waste resources on reinventing the wheel. Let's build integrations with the best in the breed. What I've since realized is that the analytics platforms are super powerful and great for we call it for like largely for transactional use cases. Yes, you can get like subscription cohort analysis. Yes, you can get product insight around like which product did the person buy and stick around longer in your different subscription cohorts. Like they're extremely, extremely powerful. But what we realize is that there is a layer of data that is unique specifically to subscription behavior that analytics tools don't have. And so that's where we have actually focused our energy, is on how can we help you as a brand really segment your customers, and in that identify what are the different characteristics of good customers and bad customers, and helping you create messages and offers that are specifically designed for each of those segments, right? And so in that, you can be like, here's a segment of customers who have subscriptions on repeat. They don't skip frequently. They've spent X amount of money. That's a great cohort of customers. Meanwhile, you can target people who frequently skip, and you'll treat them differently. You'll probably want to do more communication around offers to get them to actually fulfill or follow through with their next order because they have a history of skipping. But it's also an opportunity for you to do customer development and understand what is it about my subscription experience that's resulting in the person consistently skipping. And so what we've created is these, I call these this mesh of tools that you can only provide as the subscription provider. Because if we are integrating with an analytics tool, they don't have insights necessarily into how often people skip. I mean, we send that data to Klaviyo, but Klaviyo has no way of analyzing on your behalf like all the different skips. What you can do is in Klaviyo, when a skip event happens, you can trigger a flow. And so for us, the key part, especially if you're running a business that's in membership or subscriptions, is around the segmentation and being able to find and look at the different groups of your customers and then tailor the experience and the offers to each one of them to match the carrot. I'll say the carrot and the stick to match the carrot with the right segment of customer. Whether that's, yeah, does that make sense?
Totally. And I find it super interesting because I've been working with many CPG brands. And then Ben, like related, do you feel that brands know how to maximize this data and its benefits? Or is it more that it's sort of like something where you help out? Or do you feel that brands know how to utilize all of this data?
Well, I mean, brands is a very broad topic, right? Or broad, it's a broad, just like saying, does every American understand U.S. history? No, some know it really well. Some of us don't, right? So with a lot of the brands that we talk to, like they'll be really smart and experience in certain aspects of data, but there are certain things, especially because subscriptions, although it's a maturing market, there hasn't been a lot of tools designed to help a subscription brand or a brand that offers subscriptions to really go in and segment their customers. There haven't been a lot of tools like that on Shopify. And again, because a lot of this data exists within the subscription solution, there aren't a lot of tools to do much with that data. And so I would say that every brand operator I talk to knows that they could be doing more. And their big question is, what should I be doing? Right, which is a
Yeah.
very fair and natural question. And so that has been like sort of a huge part of our own customer development around just like how can we help continue to better serve, specifically around, we'll call it pairing offers with segments of customers and helping you realize things about your customer base and their behaviors that were not obvious through your other tools. I would say that certain brands we've talked to have had a very clear point of view of the types of questions that they want to answer. No one has come to me and had been like, "This is exactly what I want," and then I'm like, "Yes, you're not missing anything." By and large, like and that's part of what's fun about this is you can kind of. I really enjoy brainstorming and talking to these brands and sort of walking backwards from what's the goal you're trying to accomplish, and ignoring the fact of whether or not you think it's technologically possible. What is it you're trying to do? And then what I'm good at and our team's really good at is kind of being able to connect the dots and being like, oh, this is how we could try to glean that data and then put it into a usable format where you can do, a reactivation campaign or at least get a visual, call it visibility into the distribution of your customers and like sort of what segments they fall into. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I love your comment because I've been working with different type of brands, and I would totally agree that everyone is unique, and there are different, even like different individuals think about
Yeah.
subscriptions in a different perspective. But then, although being helping lots of brands, I love some of the digitally native brands for whom like subscription might be life and death.
Yeah.
It's most of their revenue coming from there, so they are very keen to test things, and they seem to like think in some cases like outside of the box, which I love. So they're willing to explore things more openly than maybe some corporate level brands who are very
Yeah.
careful about the brand awareness and how their brand is presented and so on. But it's super interesting.
Is what you just said about how the subscription model can be sort of life or death for a lot of brands, and I think that going back to what we were talking about earlier is part of the problem, right? Like there is no doubt that subscriptions are an incredible lever for building predictable revenue. The problem is that it only works on a certain segment of customers. And one of the questions, going back to data, that I ask brands when I talk to them is, I'm like, how frequently do your consumers skip? And do you know who the frequent skippers are? And what are you doing about it? Because and I will tell you, there's not been a single brand that's been, oh, I know exactly what percentage of our customers skip. And I'm like, don't you think that's a problem? And like, how often, how consistently do they skip? How consistently do they reschedule? Because that is indicative, those are leading indicators of churn, or at least leading indicators that there's something about the subscription experience that's not suiting them. Doesn't mean that it's like annoying them, but there's something that's happening there that's worth digging into, because you're going to inevitably probably lose that customer faster than the other ones. And so just making sure that you have visibility and have a strategy around, I call it like providing a great experience for that segment of customers where, they're constantly skipping and stuff like that, is really, really important. And it's important that brands are thinking about this and figuring out, how can I identify like who those customers are? Because it's going to be a pretty big percentage of your consumers.
Very good. Awesome examples. And it was just like linked to that. Last week, I learned something new. I was talking to one enterprise level CPG brand, and they introduced me like data in Europe. And they told that, hey, these are the countries which are sort of like the death valley of subscriptions, because some of the Europeans love their summer vacations. They are on vacation up to two
Oh yeah.
months.
Oh my
And
goodness.
if you don't have the possibility to easily pause a subscription, then that will be the death valley, and then
Yep.
people start to churn like crazy. So again, like very practical example, and markets are specific, customer profiles are specific, so you never know.
Yeah, and I mean that's even an interesting idea. Is like, let's say you have an international business, have different messaging for people who are geographically based in Europe, because on average, you know, Europeans behave differently in certain months, and they
Yep.
love vacation.
Yeah.
No, but what you're saying is great. Like that makes complete sense to me, and it's something that I'd be curious to hear from you, how adoption of subscription has accelerated or not in Europe, because I know it's always been like, I think the United States was one of the sort of most ardent subscription cultures. I think Australia's up there too, but I've always heard that Europe's been fairly like slow to adopt. What's your point of view on that?
Yep, I would fully agree, Ben. So I think like Europe is still getting there. We have been very familiar with subscriptions such as Spotify, actually a Swedish company originally, and Netflix and others, but it's
Mm,
more about the services. But as example, when it comes to subscribing consumables, we are not
yeah.
quite there yet. I think like if I compared all the different markets and data that I've seen, UK is more mature than some
Mm,
other markets, especially the younger generations in the UK are subscribing more, or then in some specific categories such as food, beverages, pet food,
mm-hmm.
UK has been already like pretty strong. But then when it comes to other European markets, we are still like then getting there. However, I see the same trend that you just mentioned, that these memberships, that
Mm,
with the subscription you get a membership which unlocks some things, and in
mm-hmm.
quite many cases they have something to do with the physical life, events or whatever, parties or something, which you then get sort of like exclusive access once when you subscribe.
I'm curious. Could you dig in a little bit about? We'll ignore England. Like, what is it about Europe and the European consumer? Is it? I mean, it's obvious. I can't imagine it's all about the holiday season and traveling, right? Like, what is it culturally in your mind, or not just culturally? Like, what is it?
Well, it might be a cultural thing in some of the countries, that they are not used to sort of like paying up front. You need to see the item and then you get it, and then you get it from a physical store. I think that's still a trend in quite many markets. But even bigger sort of like hurdle is that in many European countries, sort of the whole retail trade is very centrally sort of like focused. There are only few players on the market, so
Mm,
there might be like two supermarket chains on the market in
mm-hmm,
Finland, as example. So the amount of like options on the market are much narrow. This also goes with the brands, and then when a new player comes in town, it's expected that that happens in retail, not directly online. So sort of like D2C has been sort of a very fresh and new thing, and we've had some cases, as example in the Nordics, such as like Birchbox and others, sort of like people who have mimicked the idea, but they have not been too successful. The best sort of like cases I've seen have gotten like few tens of thousands of subscribers, and sort of the best cases have been most likely in food or certain beverages. Sort of the way to sell more to Europeans, as example, is that in countries where alcohol sales online were well unlocked during the pandemic, that was like real growth I could see. But then in other categories, it's still been rather slow. But now
That's
it's been told that younger generations are more open to subscriptions in all of the studies.
that's really interesting because I wonder how much of it is. So you're saying one variable is we'll call it lack of options. Um, I wonder, but if people really wanted subscriptions, you'd expect them to like be buying from the like the limited number of subscription companies and then just being really annoyed and angry that these are the only options. My observation from just my experience here is I imagine part of it is it's harder. I don't know for this for a fact. I'm speculating. So I would imagine it's more difficult to operate a D2C brand in Europe due to fragmentation of all the different countries, maybe less consolidation of like populations. I mean, obviously there are large cities in Europe, but unless you're in like Berlin, what are the equivalents to like to the United States? But I do also wonder, like, is it that much easier to manage your supply chain in the United States as opposed to Europe?
Well, I love the question because I would have like at least three different answers, but I try to push it everything in short. So I think that you were on the right tracks there. So it's definitely harder to run an operation that would be in multiple countries. So as example, just in a very basic thing in CPG, like packaging, you would need to have everything in the packaging in multiple different languages, and that costs. And many brands are not willing to take the risk, or they, as example, have like different items per market. So one really big CPG brand, they actually the name of the brand is very different in the UK than mainland Europe. So there are these kind of like internal hurdles which make it probably like not as easy as in some other markets. And in specific in CPG category, when it comes to, as example, few of the items, as example in Germany, there has always been this kind of a price war. So Germans hate to pay lots for their shampoo and conditioner, and these consumables are on a different price range than in other markets. And in Germany, it's tough to make any money there if you are not running the operation in scale. So yeah, every single market is very unique. And when it comes to like logistics, I think that's sort of like surprising, because what we have noticed from data, it's actually cheaper to run an operation in Europe than the States. So the logistics for small consumables, especially if you're in the greater European markets, are cheaper than the US. So I thought that's sort of like interesting notice that we have created. Must have something to do with the fact that if you're in sort of like the mid Europe or South Europe, the distances between these countries and locations aren't that great. But if you're
Right.
selling items from a warehouse from New York to LA, then there is that certain distance.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting. 'Cause I guess the theme that sticks out to me in what you were talking about is it's like localization of the price and the behavior, because there are so many distinct cultures throughout Europe, which is interesting to think about because I wouldn't necessarily look at the United States and be like, oh, like, but maybe as a single, I mean, obviously I went to school in the South. I've lived in California. I live in New York City. Like there are very distinct cultures and people behave
Yeah.
differently. And obviously those are just three just basic examples. But I would imagine, and certainly with countries, you have just so much more history and like cultural undertones that drive a lot of like I don't know if the term's tribalism, but like it's like it doesn't matter that you're on the border of another country. You might have a completely different sort of, I don't want to say worldview, but a very different experience that in effect impacts a lot of your, decisions around what you want to buy, what your lifestyle's like, versus someone living in uh, you know, Connecticut versus New York City, right? Like, yes, they're different states, and that's probably a bad example because a lot of people have second homes in Connecticut or in New York, and they commute. But like, you get the point where it's like, yeah, they're
Yep.
different, but not so culturally different necessarily.
Yep. And I fully agree there. I spent kind of lots of time in the States, but for some reason, like brands in the States have this kind of, or you have that kind of a pride that is like a
Mm.
nationwide brand. And for some reason, there is
Buy
not a
America,
similar pride in like Europe-wide brand. And
right?
I don't quite know how it's been built like that. Maybe it
Yeah.
has something to do with the history and behavior. And also that kind of many of European CPG brands are ultra local. They might have just like single market where they are focusing on. So might have something to do with that fact.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense.
Anyway, this was great. What about if you look, Ben, a bit forward? What emerging trends do you see in subscription services overall in the CPG space? What is happening next?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes down to the consumer experience. Um, People want products. People are always going to be buying products. Um, the call it fight for attention has only accelerated with more and more brands wanting to woo consumers. We now have more variations of more products than any of us could ever or even want to have to think about. Um, and so the brands who will continue to do really well are the ones I think who build brands with a capital B, meaning that they've created a brand experience and the customers who buy from it, they enjoy the experience. And I think this goes back to just design and a lot of what I saw in advertising when I was working with design agencies. A lot of the work that like IDEO is a company I've looked up to for years, and I had the opportunity to work with him at one point as an entrepreneur in residence and an engineer designer. And a lot of the philosophy around building products at IDEO is around it's consumer centric. It's focusing on what does the consumer need, and then how do you deliver it. It's not about you as a product. It's about how do you deliver an amazing experience. And if you look at the ethos of someone like Jeff Bezos, it's all about the customer. And so none of this is controversial, but I do think that
Hmm?
where things are going is consumer expectations are increasingly high, right? Because more and more brands are offering unique and interesting experiences. And so just for you to maintain the loyalty and mind share of a customer that you're doing business with, you need to provide an experience that is great. And a big part of that is looking at where do the experiences break down. And in CPG, I see it breaking down specifically in replenishment. But you, on the other hand, you also have this opportunity around layering in additional value at we'll call it like the membership level that just provides a great experience. That yes, when you enjoy when you use the product, um, you're having a great experience. And those are the types of things that keep people coming back and buying over and over again and build affinity. It's almost like if you think of brands where it's like the brand just kind of understands me. There's very few of those in my life, but there are certain brands that I've purchased from where I'm just like, man, it might not be the cheapest, and but like, man, their marketing speaks to me. The experience is great. Like I enjoy doing business with them. And a lot of it comes down to those details. And so just as a brand, like my advice is looking at, first and foremost, how are consumer behaviors changing and what can you continue to do to, perhaps incorporate new things into your purchasing experience, whether it's at the subscription level or not. Because again, subscribers are a segment of your customers, and in aggregate, like the LTV is really attractive, but it's going to be increasingly difficult to keep subscribers when every single person is looking for that subscription relationship. So do not ignore the other 85% of your customers who they love your product, they like it, they just want possibly more control over the experience. And so I think we're going to see a lot more brands doing that, finding ways to provide more control, more, I guess, incorporation of preferences. Um, that's sort of I'd say like my 2 cents.
I think that was a super smart comment. So thanks for that. And I'm still like thinking about things you said. My question, the last question for today would be that how has COVID pandemic affected the market dynamics, and what has now changed post pandemic? This is the question that I've been asked almost on a daily basis. So Ben, what would be your view?
Um, so I'm positive I'm not going to say anything new, but there was an acceleration and then a bit of a cliff. um, I think that the lasting impact that COVID had was on consumer behaviors. I mean, QR codes are something that we've all seen on bus stands for like 10 years and no one's ever used. Now everyone uses QR codes at restaurants, at least in the United States. Like it was like overnight consumer behavior became more digital. Even like my parents use it, right? And so it was like such a, you know, unsettling is maybe the wrong word. I mean, obviously it's a an appropriate word, but it's like such a disruptive experience that people had to change their behaviors. Now, there are certain parts of those changes in behaviors that, like the pendulum swung so far that, now it's kind of gone back where, yeah, people didn't want to go into grocery stores or they couldn't go into grocery stores or the lines were insane because you couldn't go inside the grocery store. And so there was this heyday for D2C. It's still like that behavior is there. It's just people are not as exclusively relying on it. And so, I think there are some, if I were to look, yeah, my takeaways are there are some new ingrained behaviors at multiple generations of people, given how much of an impact COVID had that, yeah, are presumably here to stay. And in terms of like new business opportunities and stuff like that, I think we'll see more and more marrying of offline and online experiences. I think I'm even speaking for myself. It's like COVID was an isolating period. I didn't see a lot of my friends for a couple of years. Even though I'm a tech nerd, I'm a social person. I live in New York City, and like I'd walk around and it was like a ghost town. And so I think certainly for a while we're seeing a resurgence and people wanting to go out and meet people. And like Broadway would be another great example, like people going to shows and having experiences. So I think just thinking about how can you have in-person live experiences that connect people, because as a culture I think a lot of us have been sort of removed from that, and we need that as people.
Really good. Thanks, Ben. My final question is that where can people reach you out? How can they find out more about Rodeo if they are curious?
Sure. I'm pretty easy to find, and I'm sure this will be in the show notes. But you can message me on LinkedIn. My name is Ben Fisher. Also on Twitter, my username is Skinny and Bald because I'm kind of skinny, kind of bald. Or you can check us out on our website, hey.rodeo, and that's hey like HEY, period rodeo, RODEO. But yeah, if you've ever have any questions, reach out to me through Twitter, LinkedIn, email. It's Ben@HeyRodeo. I'm not accepting carrier pigeons at this moment, but more or less every other communication mechanism I'll do.
Great. Thanks, Ben. Thank you so much for your time, and tune in for next episode next Monday. Take care, Ben.
Awesome.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for having me. All right. Take care.